your back. The ones who spoke it into existence before anyone else could even imagine it. The ones who called their shot in complete darkness and now watch everyone pretend they predicted it too. You know exactly what I'm talking about. That moment could have been months ago, could have been longer when you said it out loud to yourself, to your notes, to the universe itself that this was coming. You knew. You felt it before the proof existed. You declared your own victory while they were still writing you off. And now that you've made it real, now that the world has bent to your vision, suddenly everyone's memory is failing them. Suddenly, they're all agreeing like they saw it from the start, reframing their own stories in real time, adjusting their mental records to make it seem like they were always backing you. But you remember. You remember the silence that followed when you shared your vision. You remember those polite smiles, those worried glances, the people who shifted topics fast, because your certainty unsettled them. You remember posting your predictions, your intentions, your unavoidable success, and seeing those red receipts stack up with absolute silence. They saw every single word. They absorbed every syllable. They just didn't believe any of it. Here's the hilarious part about people. They hate being wrong, but they really hate being wrong about you. So instead of admitting they doubted you, instead of accepting their blindness, they execute this incredible mental gymnastics routine where they convince themselves they always had faith. They're rewriting reality right before your eyes, performing like your success was inevitable, like they called it from miles away. But you've got the evidence. You've got the memories seared into your mind. Every dismissive reaction, every doubtful look, every person who went completely silent when you shared your plans, every fake ally who disappeared the second things got hard. You documented it all, not out of bitterness, but because you knew this moment would arrive. You knew the instant you started winning, they'd all return with edited histories and convenient forgetting. They're moving through life now pretending they were always supporting you, always knew you possessed it, always believed you'd reach it. Meanwhile, you were constructing this reality in total solitude while they whispered behind your back. Let's discuss that prediction, that flash of clarity when you witnessed your future before it existed. That wasn't chance, that wasn't wishful thinking. That wasn't manifestation in some magical way. That was you decoding reality, recognizing the patterns, seeing the path that nobody else could perceive because they were trapped in the present moment like cattle. You grasped something fundamental about momentum, about inevitability, about effort colliding with timing. You weren't guessing, you were computing, you weren't wishing. You were understanding, and that understanding, that marrow-deep certainty, despite zero outside confirmation, that's what distinguished you from the rest. While they needed the universe's permission, you granted yourself authority. While they searched for signals, you became the signal. While they demanded proof before faith, you believed so intensely you manufactured the proof. That's not ordinary. That's not how normal people function. Normal people need the victory first, then they'll trust themselves after. But you trusted in the win when it was still invisible, when it was just neurons firing in your skull, when it lived nowhere except inside your vision. They labeled it delusional, right? They didn't say it directly because they're too spineless for honesty, but you sensed it in their energy, caught it in their quiet, noticed it in how they avoided your gaze when you discussed your future, delusional, impractical, overconfident, preparing yourself for failure. They possessed 1,000 gentle methods to communicate that you were reaching too high, imagining too large, being too loud. And the twisted part? Some of them genuinely believed they were shielding you from pain. They thought their skepticism was compassion. Their low standards were protection. Their discouragement was guidance. They couldn't picture your success, so they attempted to shrink your expectations to fit their narrow perspective. But you didn't need their safety. You didn't need their grounded viewpoint. You needed them to step aside. And finally, you simply stopped letting them into your consciousness. You stopped broadcasting your vision to people who couldn't see beyond their own restrictions. You went dark, not because your belief faded, but because you realized faith doesn't need witnesses. Now here's where it becomes fascinating. The second you stopped hunting validation, the second you stopped attempting to persuade anyone, the second you just committed to the execution, in total silence, that's when reality started rearranging itself. You weren't searching for signs because you were buried in building. You weren't monitoring for support because you were drowning in action. You weren't concerned about who trusted you because you were sustained by something more potent than outside approval. You had certainty, not confidence, not hope, not positivity, certainty. The type that doesn't crack when barriers emerge because barriers were already factored into the calculation. You understood this wasn't going to be simple. You never imagined it would be effortless. You just understood that despite the resistance, despite the failures, despite how many times you had to modify the approach, the destination was guaranteed. That depth of understanding, that's what baffled them. They're accustomed to confidence that shatters under weight. They're comfortable with faith that dissolves when challenged. But your understanding that remained concrete through everything, remember those stretches of silence, those periods where you barely appeared, barely spoke, barely revealed yourself to anyone. They assumed you quit. They assumed you were hiding in embarrassment, processing your wounds, accepting the truth that perhaps you weren't as exceptional as you believed. Some of them felt relieved. Finally, they thought, finally this person is discovering humility, accepting their position, learning that visions don't always materialize. They monitored your presence, anticipating signs of your collapse, some proof that you were unraveling, some hint that life had corrected you. But they discovered nothing, just silence, calculated, deliberate, commanding silence. Because you weren't hiding, you were incubating, you weren't conquered, you were in the workshop, you weren't shattered, you were assembling the exact thing you predicted months prior, element by element in absolute darkness with nobody observing, nobody applauding, nobody confirming a single movement. That's what separates you from them. They require validation at every checkpoint. You constructed an empire in silence and only unveiled it when complete. And then it manifested. The victory arrived precisely as you declared. Perhaps not on your exact schedule, perhaps not in your exact vision, but the core of it. The soul of your prediction materialized into reality. Opportunities emerged. Pathways opened, resources surfaced, people started recognizing, your name started circulating. Suddenly, you're receiving contact, requests, propositions, acknowledgement. Suddenly, people want to partner, want to study you, want to attach themselves to your achievement. And the most intriguing element, they're all performing like this surprises them, but doesn't stun them. Like they sensed you'd accomplish it, like they always recognized you possessed something unique, like they were supporting you throughout. And you're observing this theater, this collective gaslighting spectacle, this mass revision of truth, and you can't help but find it amusing because you remember who appeared in the void, you remember who stayed quiet when you needed backing. You remember who rejected your vision when it was merely concepts. They're returning now with their altered stories. People who ignored your messages 6 months back are now flooding your comments, acting like lifelong friends. People who left you unread when you expressed your ambitions are now amplifying your victories like they witnessed it from day one. People who criticized you privately are now praising you publicly, and they've persuaded themselves this isn't contradiction. They've actually rewritten their memories to eliminate their doubt, to erase their dismissal, to forget their abandonment. Human psychology operates like that. People will genuinely deceive themselves to escape the discomfort of misjudging you. They'll fabricate false recollections of being encouraging. They'll recall exchanges that never occurred where they uplifted you. They'll remember trusting you when the truth is they never considered you, because acknowledging they doubted you means acknowledging their perception was broken, and that's unbearable, so they simply alter the narrative. But you're not resentful about it. You're not furious. You're not bitter, you're just conscious, painfully, clearly, eternally conscious of who people truly are when your success isn't visible. You absorbed an irreplaceable lesson during those months of questioning and quiet. You discovered that most people's support depends on your success being obvious and undeniable. They'll applaud you at the victory line, but they won't prepare with you in the shadows. They'll honor your achievements, but they won't trust your forecasts. They'll declare you their motivation once you've arrived, but they'll ignore you completely when you're still constructing. And that's not wicked. That's not intentional. That's simply human design. Most people aren't courageous enough to trust invisible victories. Most people require evidence before they contribute their belief. Most people are followers, monitoring which way the masses shift before they engage. And you were never most people. You were the one advancing in a direction nobody else perceived, following instructions nobody else could interpret, chasing a location nobody else accepted existed. The magnificent aspect about all this historical revision is that you don't need to expose anyone. You don't need to retrieve old conversations and reveal who questioned you. You don't need to compile a breakdown showing who ignored you when you announced your intentions. You don't need documentation because your victory is the documentation. Your achievement is the confirmation. Your existence is the validation. They can revise history endlessly, but you possess the truth. You know who was authentic. You know who materialized. You know who trusted when trust was costly. And crucially, you know who you are. You're the person who forecasted their own triumph and then actualized it through absolute determination, labor, and unchanging understanding. That's not something they can steal from you. That's not something they can modify or reinterpret. That's your narrative, your expedition, your conquest. Let them revise their participation. Let them pretend they were always faithful. Let them persuade themselves they anticipated it. Because ultimately, their account of history doesn't transform your truth. Here's what truly frightens them. They're not frightened that you succeeded. Success narratives happen constantly. They're frightened that you predicted it. They're frightened that you possessed vision when they possessed skepticism. They're frightened that you operated on a wavelength they couldn't sense. They're frightened that you hold something they lack, something they can't acquire, something they can't duplicate, the capacity to perceive the invisible, the capacity to trust the impossible, the capacity to recognize your future before it materializes. That's what terrifies them, because if you can accomplish that, if you can forecast your own triumph and then manifest it through absolute force of determination and execution, then what else are you capable of? What other futures have you already witnessed that haven't arrived yet? What other predictions have you declared that they're going to observe? They're rewriting the past because they're terrified of your future. They want to position themselves with you now before your next prediction becomes reality, before your next vision takes form, before your next impossible achievement becomes undeniable truth. Let's examine that sensation you experienced months back when you made the prediction. Remember it? That wave of understanding that originated from somewhere deeper than reason, somewhere past logical analysis. It wasn't hope. Hope contains doubt within it. It wasn't confidence. Confidence can be disturbed. It was understanding. Pure, complete, immovable understanding. You weren't attempting to persuade yourself. You weren't inflating yourself. You were simply conscious of a future that already existed in potential state, and you were merely acknowledging it verbally. That's a different frequency than most people access. Most people predict using historical data. They examine their past and extrapolate forward using trends. But you predicted using something entirely different. You predicted using who you were transforming into, not who you had been. You predicted using the dedication you were about to invest, not the dedication you had already completed. You predicted using a version of yourself that didn't exist yet, but was unavoidable. That's advanced level. That's beyond manifestation. That's creation announcing itself into being through you. And now that it's occurred, now that your prediction proved precise, you've activated something within yourself that can never be removed. You've demonstrated to yourself that you can witness the future, not in some supernatural way, but in the way that you comprehend cause and effect on a deeper dimension than most. You comprehend that reality is more flexible than people assume. You comprehend that the future isn't predetermined, but it's also not chaos. It responds to purpose, to vision, to unwavering understanding supported by tireless execution. Most people will never grasp this. They'll credit your success to fortune, circumstances, advantages, conditions. They need to accept that. They need outside elements to rationalize your victory because the alternative is too uncomfortable. The alternative is that you simply perceived something they couldn't perceive and then made it tangible through absolute will that would indicate they're restricted not by situations, but by vision. That would indicate their shortcomings aren't because existence is unjust, but because they lack the bravery to predict their own victories. That's too overwhelming for them to process, so they'll rewrite history instead. Observe what occurs next. Observe how they start treating you now that you've succeeded. Suddenly, your thoughts matter. Suddenly, your guidance is worthwhile. Suddenly, your viewpoint is profound. It's the identical viewpoint you've always possessed. You're the identical person who forecasted this victory months ago. But now that the victory is observable, now that achievement has confirmed your vision, suddenly they're absorbing. Suddenly they want to understand how you accomplished it. Suddenly they want to study your systems. And here's where you must be cautious. Because these people, these history revisers, these conditional believers, they want the outcome without the process. They want your victory without your battle. They want your understanding without your uncertainty. They want your success without your months of silent grinding in complete isolation. They believe you possess some secret, some technique, some bypass. They don't grasp that the secret was simply this: you trusted your own prediction and then refused to recognize any reality that contradicted it. That's it. That's the complete equation. But they can't process that. They want something more elaborate, more instructional, more attainable. They want the framework without the requirement of becoming the type of person who can forecast their own future. So, what do you do with all this? How do you navigate this transformed reality where everyone's pretending they always trusted you? First, you remember. You remember who was genuine. You remember who appeared when appearing was expensive. You remember who believed when believing demanded courage. Those people, the authentic ones, they're your foundation now. They're the ones who secured their position in your story. Everyone else, they're just characters in the scenery, background actors in your film, figures in the masses. They can celebrate your victory. They can insist they knew throughout. They can rewrite history in their consciousness, but they don't receive access. They don't receive closeness. They don't receive the authentic you, the you that existed before the victory, the you that forecasted this triumph when it was still merely a murmur in the darkness. That version of you is protected for the people who trusted that version, not the people who only surfaced once that version validated itself. Second, you continue predicting. You don't stop at this victory. This achievement was merely proof of concept. It was confirmation that your predictive capacity is legitimate, that your vision is precise, that your understanding is reliable. So what's next? What's the next impossible achievement you're going to summon into existence? What's the next triumph you're going to forecast that nobody will accept until it's undeniable? Because here's the reality about people who can witness the future. They don't achieve one prediction correctly by accident. It's an ability. It's a frequency. It's a method of existing. And now that you've validated it once, now that you've proven that you can forecast your own victory and then manifest it, you're functioning on an entirely different plane.